Hello! Welcome back to Aetheral Space. That was perhaps the most flamboyant opening to Aetheral Space I've done so far.
Hello! It's me,
Hello!
Tanhony!
Hello, boys!
Jesus Christ.
And so now it's the most flamboyant opening.
I've got to eat. I'm hungry, but we're going to just try and tear through these Aetheral Spaces. We're doing it, lads. So let's get started, shall we? Who needs a recap? Frickin' Dragon negotiated with Nail. That's all you need to know.
Just
2 days.
There's a good recap. Just go to the last video.
Smile. 2 days, Dragon said. You give us 2 days to prepare our surrender, to ensure the safety of our non-combatants, and we'll give them back unharmed. You have my word on that. Behind his back, Dragon Hadrian crossed his fingers so devilishly. Nail blinked, his doubt almost emanating down the length of the table. I have absolutely zero doubt that you'd use those 2 days to try and find a way to escape your predicament. The truth was more useful than any lie here. You're absolutely right, but we'd be trying to do that anyway. By agreeing to these terms, you have control over the ways we'll be trying to escape, and once 2 days pass, you'll be able to bring us in without a fight. I'm sure your men would appreciate the reduced risk to themselves, too. Mandarin gulped, the decision clearly being weighed over in his head. This man was the sort whose thoughts showed up on their face. The desire to protect his comrades, the yearning for a peaceful solution. This guy's way better than Musashi morally. Not character-wise, but morally. The need to conduct himself in a way he could be proud of. The strings to this instrument were a little different than a toy Musashi, but they made the same song. Principle. Nail Manwin would take risks if it meant maintaining his principles. Dragon's eyes flicked over to Mandarin's aide's hand, moving over to tap him on the shoulder. He couldn't allow that. Outside influence could mess up the scenario he'd created. I'm not willing to wait forever for an answer, Dragon snapped, interrupting Mandarin's train of thought, allowing just enough time for consideration for the result he desired. If it becomes apparent we have no chance of escaping the situation, we may just launch a suicide attack on this camp. We'd have nothing to lose after all. Mandarin's brow deepened in distaste. You show your true character, then. Yes, Dragon agreed. I show my true character. There was silence in the tent for an if he really wants Dragon to show his true character, he should just turn around. There was silence in the tent for an
sorry, I dropped my book as I was coming in. Could you please pick it up for me? That's the next strategy.
There was silence in the tent for an uncomfortably long time, the only sounds being the marching of the soldiers outside and the occasional shift of someone's stance. Mandarin glared right into Dragon's eyes as the seconds dragged on, as if trying to drill right into his brain and pull out any true intentions right then and there. Finally, though, he spoke. I cannot agree to these terms here and now. Dragon's heart skipped a beat. I'd advise you, here and now, I said. Give me 2 hours to discuss this with my advisors. This is not a decision to be made in haste. Until the decision is made, you and your associates will wait within the camp. Is that agreeable? His tone didn't leave much room for disagreement. Dragon scowled. And what if you decide you'd rather have us as hostages? Mandarin smiled thinly. It seems you simply have to trust that I'm a man of my word. Oh, Mandarin talks like me. He's going to say no, Dragon pouted, arms crossed as he sat back in his chair. They'd been moved, I assume, to another part of the camp, a clearing between some of the tents, meaning that guards could observe them from every direction. Dragon could feel a dozen cautious pairs of eyes on him. He had no doubt that if they made any funny moves, that caution would become outright hostility very quickly. Bruno glanced down at him. You're sure? 100%. If I was able to pressure him to make the decision here and there, he'd have said yes, but I don't have any influence on those advisors of his. They'll talk him out of making the stupid choice. You never know, Bruno shrugged. Maybe they're like him. They could do the honorable thing. Dragon shook his head. He's clearly a smart guy. He'd picked people with different perspectives from him to serve as advisors. If anything, they're probably more like me, meaning they're assholes. There's an even chance we get... I assume there's even a chance we get taken hostage. There's an even chance we get taken hostage once all this is over. I feel like I'm fucking up Bruno's voice. Bruno's frown became Serena's. But Mr. Dragon, she groaned, I don't want to be a hostage. Can't we do anything? Ignoring his body's creaks of protest, Dragon leaned forward in his seat, rubbing his chin. Well, he said quietly, so that the guards couldn't hear, I knew this was a possibility. Guess there's no need for me to give the signal. Serena cocked her head. What do you mean? Betting all their lives on Nail Mandarin's unwillingness to risk a single soldier was a terrible plan. No matter how honorable he was, the leader of an army couldn't have risen to that position without a healthy sliver of pragmatism. The waging of battles by necessity cost countless lives. And all this negotiation amounted to, when you got down to it, was a very slow battle. So that plan had been doomed from the very start. It was a good thing, then, that hadn't been Dragon's plan at all. He smirked. What's up with Dragon and smirking every 2 seconds?
Because he's so smart. He loves it.
A super-powered mind!
Brain blast!
Ruth Sorry. Ruth watched the camp through the line of the forest, perched high in an elder tree. Red aether sparked around her fingers as they dug into the bark, keeping her anchored in place. Her gaze flicked from Dragon's group out in the open to the tent they'd been let out of. That was the location of her target, then. The place where she'd be able to kill Nail Mandarin. To kill a snake, you cut off the head. The comparison didn't work 100% when it came to an army, but losing their leadership would still leave them in a state of confusion. That would give them a better chance of escaping once they made a real break for it. Ruth adjusted her position in the tree slightly, freeing her hands, and as she did so, the skeletal set appeared over her form with only the mildest buzz of aether. The attention of the guards was focused on Dragon's group. She'd have a few seconds to get to the tent and assassinate Nail Mandarin. After that, she'd need to make a run for it. There was no telling how many Guardian Entity users were present in the camp. This was her chance. She felt it in her bones. This was her chance to make up for her failure last time. A lashed corpse, strapped to a post. Ruth Blaine never made the same mistake twice. She kicked off the tree, landed on the ground, and with a flash of movement, rushed towards the command tent. Nail sighed, his face in his hands as he addressed the rest of his advisors. The words he spoke felt wrong, ugly in his mouth. "It pains me to say it," he forced out, "but you are correct. The life of one regulator is not worth losing the chance to eliminate the rebels. We must trust he can make his own escape." Abram nodded. The dark-skinned, long-haired man was sat directly on Nail's right, his hands clasped on the table before him. "A wise choice, Commander. I've worked with the man before. He is capable. If we place our faith in him, he will not disappoint." He looked as if he was going to say more, but fell silent when he met Greena's gaze. The advisor opposite him, Eris, a mousy woman with a shaved head, continued, her voice barely expressive enough to avoid monotony. "We have a high-ranking representative of the enemy in our hands. Regardless of what he himself says, he may have value as a hostage. There's a chance we could make an exchange to get our man back." Nail Mandarin was not a wise man. He was exceedingly aware of that fact. He was idealistic and headstrong and somewhat naive, and so he surrounded himself with those who were unscrupulous and cautious and very much jaded. They would indulge him when they could and rebuke him when they could not. They were his wisdom, stored externally, and he was forever grateful. He nodded, but a frown remained on his face. "If we imprison their ambassador, it'll permanently put an end to any chance of negotiating with the rebel forces." Eris's lips tightened into a straight line of displeasure. "That kind of thinking is in itself is a liability, sir. You must remember these rebels are criminals before anything else. By acknowledging the office of an ambassador, you give them legitimacy. That is the last thing we want. Criminals are an object of fear, but rebellion, once acknowledged, has a certain sense of momentum." Abram rubbed one of his eyes. "We can't let ourselves be fooled by a young man with slick words and a smug smile, Commander. Remember that we have all but won. We have surrounded them. We have driven them to these desperate tactics. We are but one step from victory. We can't allow them to convince us to walk backwards." Nail closed his eyes, mulling over the advice. The notion felt sickly in Nail's stomach, but he knew that his advisors spoke sense. Capturing the ambassador was the best way forward. If this rebellion continued, it would result in countless more deaths on both sides. Better that a spark be put out now than to watch the inferno afterwards. He opened his eyes. "Gather your men," he said. "All that wield guardian entities. We don't know what kind of abilities these outsiders could possess. We'll attack at once to subdue them and have them lead us to their main base. Then..." Greena's grip tightened on his shoulder. Immediately he looked up at her cautious gaze. "What is it?" Everything happened at once. There was a flash of red movement, a gust of what felt like wind, and a sound like a cannon going off. And at the same time, the enemy appeared among them, having shredded right through the wall of the tent. At first, Nail thought it was a guardian entity, but a second inspection showed that it at least appeared to be human. A young woman crouched low to the ground like an insect with metal armor bound around their body. Claws protruded from the woman's knuckles, glinting with deadly promise, and what hair was visible on the back of her head shone like a raging fire. Nail saw the eyes behind the mask's red... You need an apostrophe there, King. Mask's red lenses settle on his face. Target acquired. Behind the enemy, Abram slapped his hands together into a prayer stance. "Guardian entity!" he cried. "Doratabo!" Abram's guardian entity, a furry, humanoid figure coated with dripping mud, began to manifest, but the girl didn't miss a trick. I assume tick? She jumped to the side, crawling over the walls of the tent like a spider, and sliced right through the skull of Dorotabo with one hand as it began to coalesce into life. The strength she exerted was unimaginable. With the slightest gasp of exertion, she wrenched the hand she'd lodged into Dorotabo's cranium free, splitting the guardian entity's head in half horizontally. Then, in the second before the entity vanished, she seized it by the leg and slammed it right into Abram's body, sending him flying into a bookshelf off into the corner of the tent. Nail kept his eyes fixed on
beaten up with your own fucking stand.
Yeah, that's actually kind of a badass image. I want to see that. Someone takes Star Platinum and just whacks Jotaro
Just
with
fucking
it.
interrupts the summon animation, then hit you with it.
Nail kept his eyes fixed on the enemy as his advisor went flying off, but the sounds of smashing and cracking he heard were all the confirmation he needed that Abram wouldn't be rejoining the fight. Eris drew her sword, pointing it at the intruder, only she didn't because the intruder had vanished. A second later, there was another smashing sound as the enemy burst through the bottom of the long table, feet first. Her kick slamming right into Eris's chest and sending her flying right out of the tent. Excuse me. Too many rights there, you might want to cut one. There you go. Arms flailing impotently in the air. Despite himself, Nail gulped as he thrust his hand out to summon his guardian entity. The girl hadn't stopped moving once through this entire assault. Perhaps she specialized in rushing opponents then, rather than a drawn-out fight. If that was the case, Nail stood a chance so long as he could tire out his opponent, open her up to a counterattack. This power, though. Nail watched as blood-red god's blood danced around the enemy's armor. Was this girl wearing a guardian entity? A shiver ran down his spine. No, he told himself, his heartbeat slowing accordingly. Fear was pointless here. He'd die if he didn't fight, so there was no need to second-guess himself. He wasn't alone either. Grina was still by his side, pointing her handheld crossbow at the assailant. I'm waiting for him to turn around and, her head's gone, and her body's still standing. 10 seconds had passed since the beginning of the attack. The girl charged at him, pausing only to snatch Greena's arrow out of the air and stab it into the head of Eris's guardian entity. The beast had stretched its neck through the open door of the tent, the skull at the end opening its mouth wide. As Rokurokubi collapsed to the ground and dissipated in the god's blood, the girl shot back towards Nail, but Green and Eris had given him the time he needed. "Guardian entity," he said, voice steady, hand outstretched. "Shamichoro!" He felt the familiar weight in his hand before the shamisen itself appeared. A shamisen's like a guitar, right?
Yeah.
A weirdo guitar. The three-stringed musical instrument materialized, the handle flat against his palm, and in the same moment he swung it with all his strength at the girl. In terms of appearance, the shamisen was utterly ordinary. There were silver engravings across its surface, of course, winding arcs and curves that lent it a sense of beauty, but it held none of the eccentricities of other guardian entities. It was no dragon able to wind through the sky, no wheel able to burn through wood, no sword that guzzled down blood through a proboscis. It wasn't even alive. It was utterly ordinary. Oh, he's got an Aether artifact for his guardian entity, doesn't he?
Yeah, I can say.
And it was all... sorry. It was all that Nail Manrin needed. The attack didn't hit, of course. The girl brought her claws together into an X and blocked it. The collision sent a gust of wind raging throughout the tent, and the glass of the lantern hanging on the wall shattered from the frequency of the sound. Nail's hand shook as the girl pushed against Shimichiro, quickly overpowering him. That was only natural, though. An ordinary human like him couldn't win with strength alone. It took skill to stand at the top. The girl could move stronger than him, faster, deadlier. To put it simply, she was better than him. But Nail was more than used to fighting people better than him. His only recourse, then, was to fight smarter. Too bad he's fighting against frickin' fight genius Ruth... What's her name? What's Ruth's last name? Blaine, that's right. That's a pretty name. Alright, well, I'm very curious what the shamisen's abilities are. My first thought is that weird guy in Dead Man Wonderland with the guitar power. You remember him? Rock and roll! Dude, Dead Man Wonderland, you have to read it. It's such a banger. Alright,
I don't have to do anything.
I guess you don't, but it would mean... I shouldn't put pressure on you. Read what you want, kids.
Moral of the story.
Yeah. Yeah, unless it's SCPs, don't read those. It's a mistake. You should read Aetheral
You
Space.
could end up like, hey, read SCP, you might end up like me, not so bad, eh?
Hey, come on, it's not so bad, meow. I'm a great SCP author, woof. Alright, well, thank you guys for listening to Aetheral Space. Please leave a review on Roller Road. Please, please, please support the official release when it comes out! That's still happening? And I cannot wait.
Yes!
We can say that in Aetheral Space now. We can say, please support the official release.
Yeah.
Are you excited
Thank
to
you.
officially
I
release
am.
Aetheral Space?
I am, yes.
Yeah. Alright, guys. Bye!